At this stage, both of the major anti-cheat systems, those being BattlEye and EAC, otherwise known as Easy Anti-Cheat, are supported under Linux. I don't really care about the native support because if you're going to release a game natively anyway, obviously you are going to use an anti-cheat system that work natively. What is way more important to me is the fact that they both work through Wine or Proton, which is the way that most people are probably going to play their games anyway. Even a lot of the smaller anti-cheat systems, things like Zingcode, for example, have said, yeah, we're going to support Linux when the Steam Deck comes out, and I kind of expect others to do the same as well, at least if the Steam Deck sells any reasonable number of units. And then from that point, it's no longer going to be in the hands of the anti-cheat developers whether the game actually works on Linux, then it is going to be in the hands of the game developers, and that is the state we're in now. So anyone playing games through Proton on Linux probably knows about ProtonDB, and I hope this is the first place you go, not when you're just trying to debug a game, but even when you're trying to decide whether you're going to buy a game altogether, because sometimes it's frankly just not worth the time and not worth the hassle to even try to play the game under Linux. And maybe if you're gonna buy it and you want to play it, do so in a couple of months when maybe the game works a little bit better. But ProtonDB, even though it is an absolutely fantastic website, has a lot of stuff on here that maybe you're not that interested in if all you care about is anti-cheat. And since that may be the case, two sites popped up to basically address that problem. The first one being Are We Anti-Cheat Yet? And the second one being Anti-Cheat Compatibility List. Now, basically what these sites are a big list of games basically describing, is the game working with anti-cheat yet? And if it is, linking to the article or the resource from the developers saying, yes, we are going to support this, and yes, it is actually working now. So I find that this list is way, way better, like, sorted, but it's not really a comprehensive list. Whereas this one, the guy who made the list basically just went through Steam and found literally every possible game, even games that were removed, that have anti-cheat. And even games that, like, have its servers shut down. This is a much more comprehensive list. This one has search and easier to use. I kind of wish they would just merge together and just deal with that problem, but they're different sites as they stand. And as of the middle of October 2021, looking at this list is kind of depressing. Maybe in a couple of months when the Steam Deck comes out, you know, this unconfirmed section will change a little bit, but right now, there's only 13 titles on this list that are supported and 5 that are confirmed. Obviously, there is much more on this list, but, you know, there's also a lot more red on this list as well, and a lot of the games that are working are, like, old games that use anti-cheat systems that don't exactly have a problem with Linux, like Quake Live and Quake 3 Arena, for example. While not being all of it, a lot of this information about games that are going to be supported comes from an article from The Verge, where The Verge decided to actually do journalism, which is rare for The Verge, but every so often, I guess it's going to happen. What they did is they went to certain developers of popular games and asked them, hey, are you going to support the Steam Deck? And a lot of them didn't really give a great answer. A lot of them basically just said no answer yet or no comment. No comment is basically the PR speak for go away. That's pretty much a good way to put it. But a lot of the games that are going to be supported are games that people already sort of knew were going to be, like Ark. Everyone already knew was going to work. Dead by Daylight is an exception. That one people didn't actually know about. But another one here, Rust. Rust already runs on Linux. Like, it runs perfectly fine. The only thing that doesn't work is going onto an EAC-enabled server. War Thunder also has a native client, so it sort of makes sense that they would make that one work. Now, there's 2 games I want to mention which technically shouldn't be working, those being Paladins and Smite. They are both EAC games, and the developer has said, we will support this, but it's not going to happen until sometime next year. And going over to ProtonDB, you'll see that both Paladins and Smite, as of, I think it was like a week or 2 ago, have had a silver rating. So what seems to be happening in the case of these games isn't the fact that EAC has been enabled and EAC is now working under Linux. What's actually happening is the devs are dumb and release the game without enabling EAC properly, so if the EAC binary doesn't run, the game just runs. Like, it just doesn't care. So that seems to be what's happening right now, so I would avoid playing these games under Linux, even though they should work, because it may result in a ban. Now, recently, Valve has taken a step which will hopefully encourage developers to actually get their game working properly on the Steam Deck. Not just through anti-cheat, but all of the other problems that may exist running a game on Proton. And what they're going to be doing is introducing the Steam Deck Verified program, where your game is going to be given a badge, much like with Proton DB, and that badge is going to say, okay, does this game work? Does it have problems? Does it just not work altogether? So someone who is just looking through the Steam store can say, okay, I'm not going to buy that game because it's just not going to work well. Now, I would have liked them to just basically integrate it with Proton DB, but they are doing their own custom thing. And because they are doing their own custom program, that means Valve had to do something that Valve very rarely does, because Valve doesn't like spending money when they don't need to, and that is hiring people. So Valve is going to be hiring people basically to just check if the game is going to work well on the Steam Deck. But it's not just going to be like, does the game function? Does it play? Because a lot of games do just play, but just playing isn't really a good experience. They do have some requirements that a lot of people are actually really happy about. So for a game to be verified, it needs to meet all of these criteria, and for the most part, they're all pretty straightforward. So because this is a controller-based system, it does need to have controller support. This is something outside of Proton. This is more about the Steam Deck specifically. With this controller support, it needs to actually show the controller glyphs correctly, so the Steam Deck uses an Xbox-style controller layout. It needs to show that and not the PlayStation buttons. For text input, it needs to use the Steam API or have an on-screen keyboard that allows the player to actually enter stuff in the language they need to be using. Resolution support obviously needs to support the Steam Deck resolution. The game should run at a playable frame rate with the default configuration. So that means probably some games need to have their default settings turned down. Not a big deal. You can always go and fix that when you're actually in the game. And I'm sure if the default configuration isn't playable, that would be part of the warnings. And the warning will tell you, hey, you might need to turn down the graphics or whatever you need to do. The text actually needs to be legible on a screen at the size of the Steam Deck. The game needs to not say there is some, like, device compatibility warning, which would be a pretty big one. And also, here is the one that a lot of people are really happy about. So you can use game launchers, but those obviously have to work with a controller, but they recommend against using a game launcher, which I honestly think is actually a good thing, because I don't want my game launcher opening up a game launcher. And other sections of the Steam Deck documentation have some other nice little things like, hey, if it's a single-player game, you should be able to play the game when you're offline, because that's how single-player games should work. Also, if you have cutscenes in your game that are embedded video files and not rendered in engine, those should be using something like VP9, because VP9 actually plays nicely with Proton. Some other formats just don't work. For example, with Final Fantasy XIV, the opening cinematic does not play because the format is not supported. And then outside of the anti-cheat and Steam Deck world, there's been some other fun stuff happening with NVIDIA GPUs. Obviously not related to the Steam Deck, but for general Linux gaming, this is actually really cool. So Valve enables experimental NVIDIA DLSS support for DirectX 12 in Proton. So DLSS in Proton, actually really cool. A couple months back, you could enable FSR in Proton. I've been messing around with it a bit, and honestly, FSR works really well. And at the size of the Steam Deck screen, I have a feeling you can get a lot of extra performance just cranking down the resolution a bit and just relying on FSR instead. As we get closer and closer to the Steam Deck launch, I am slightly hopeful that developers are going to say, okay, now that we are closer to this, or maybe just after the launch, we are going to actually enable this feature because we can see, okay, there's actually a lot of hype around this device, and it really does make sense to enable people on that system to actually play our game. I know that a lot of indie devs are far more likely to push that support because they just want people to play their game because in their case, it's usually more of a passion project. But even the AAA devs, at some point, have to start seeing the money that is there. But it's probably not going to happen until the device is actually in the hands of users. And that's sad, but it's sort of the fact that we're going to have to live with for now. So I'm going to say, keep badgering the game developers who have not supported this or have not said they're going to support it, because some devs have actually decided, okay, our community clearly wants this and we are going to support this. So keep up the work, keep bothering the developers, sending them emails, adding them on Twitter, trying to get their attention, because you can't just assume that they are going to do it because you think it's a good thing. You have to make them realize that people actually want this to happen. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I know this was a bit more of a rambly video than it normally is, but there was a lot of things I wanted to cover, and I didn't want to do like 2 videos on these separate topics. So I felt like just merging them together, and this is what has happened. I know I've been talking about Linux gaming far more often than I otherwise would be, but there's been a lot of exciting things happening recently, and I like gaming, and I see that a lot of my audience does as well, so I think it just makes sense to cover it. So that's going to be it for me, and if you like this video and you want to support the channel and become one of these amazing people over here, please go check out my Patreon subscribers only Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. I've got a podcast called Tech Over Tea, available basically anywhere. I've got a gaming channel called Brody Robertson Plays, where I live stream twice a week, upload about 5 YouTube shorts, and this channel is also available over on Odyssey. That's going to be it for me, and I'm out.